I remind senators of their obligations under the Behavioural Code for Australian parliamentarians to treat witnesses with dignity, courtesy, fairness and respect. I remind everyone engaging in the public hearing, including witnesses and members of the public, that the behavioural standards for Commonwealth parliamentary workplaces require people to act respectfully, professionally and with integrity, encourage and value diverse perspectives and recognise the importance of a free exchange of ideas. Bullying, harassment and discrimination will not be tolerated or condoned. So I now welcome a representative of Anthropic, Mr Evan Frondorf, via video conference. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Yes, my name is Evan Frondorf and I am the Head of External Policy and Partnerships for Anthropic.
Fantastic. Thanks, Evan. And thanks so much for appearing here today, all the way from New York. We very much appreciate it. Would you like to make a statement to the committee and then we can go to questions?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So Chair, Senators, thank you for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Evan Frondorf and I'm the Head of External Policy and Partnerships on the Safeguards team here at Anthropic. I've been at the company for almost 3 years and have a previous background in trust and safety and fraud prevention. Anthropic is a leading frontier AI developer working to build reliable, interpretable, and steerable AI systems. And our AI assistant, Claude, is used by millions of people worldwide. And that ranges from large enterprises and government agencies to small businesses, researchers, and individuals. And they're using Claude for tasks like software development, data analysis, and scientific research. We believe that AI can deliver enormous benefits for society, and we're committed to realizing those benefits while developing the technology safely and responsibly. We're also incorporated as a public benefit corporation with the stated public benefit purpose of the responsible development and maintenance of AI for the long-term benefit of humanity. And that structure allows us to weigh the long and short-term consequences of our work on society. That commitment to safety is reflected across our work and our products. Anthropic had a trust and safety function, which we call Safeguards, before we even shipped our first product. And we're also deepening our commitment to Australia. We recently announced that we'll be opening an office in Sydney later this year, and we look forward to working closely with Australian institutions, researchers, and the government. So when discussing misuse, it's important to provide some context relevant to this committee's work. Unlike social media platforms, Claude doesn't have a recommendation algorithm or a content feed. It's a pull system rather than a push system. Content does not surface to a user unless they actively request it. And that means that some of the spread of synthetic media and deepfake concerns that often dominate this conversation are less central to our risk profile. What we see as the more salient risk for a system like Claude is its potential to automate or scale influence operations activity. And that's squarely where my team sits. Safeguards is responsible for keeping Claude safe once it's out in the real world. We bring together people across policy, enforcement, threat intelligence, data science, and engineering teams. These are people who think like builders, but also like our adversaries, anticipating misuse and building the right defenses. So in misinformation particularly, we take a layered approach with defenses built in at the training, guardrail, and monitoring levels. We train Claude to be factually accurate and honest about the limits of its knowledge, but also to engage with a wide variety of perspectives and provide balanced commentary on political topics. Our usage policy explicitly prohibits Claude to create or spread misleading and deceptive content. And once our models are deployed, we run automated detection systems and staff a dedicated threat intelligence team that investigates coordinated misuse and includes influence operations that we've detected, disrupted, and reported on publicly. I will do my best to answer all of your questions this morning, and thank you once again for the opportunity to appear.
Yeah, good on you, Evan. I'm just going to go to the Deputy Chair to ask questions, and I'll just note for the Hansard record, Senator Pocock has joined us today. But I do have a cheeky question for you to kick off. Did you use Claude to help you with your opening statement today?
You know, I would say it helped with some fact-checking and some drafting, but it mainly came from us.
Great, because it might be a bit spooky if Claude was writing his own summary before a Senate committee. Okay, thank you, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Evan, for appearing today. I know we issued this invitation at short notice. So we're most grateful for Anthropic accommodating us, and welcome to your first Senate hearing. I'm sure this will be the first of many to come, particularly if you're planning on establishing yourself here in Australia, which we welcome. I have a question regarding Claude. So Claude is trained to be helpful, honest, and a thoughtful assistant. Can you explain how these AI models and the training weights scientific consensus and authoritative sources in response to questions around climate or energy?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Senator. So, at a high level, training an AI model like Claude involves kind of two main stages. First, the model is learning from a really large body of diverse information sources, and that's including publicly available information from the internet, licensed data from third parties, and data that we generate internally. And that allows Claude to build a general foundation of language and knowledge. It's that second stage is where we shape the model's behavior, which is how it responds to questions, what tone it takes, how it responds to sensitive or controversial topics. And that's where one of our really important tools come in, which is called our Constitution. And that Constitution is a set of principles that we've developed that guide Claude's behavior. And some of those principles are directly related to how it should think about information like this. It should be factually accurate. It should represent consensus where it exists. It should be honest about the limits of its knowledge, but it should still engage with a range of perspectives where appropriate on contested topics.
Could you provide the committee with a list of the principles in the Constitution that you use, if that's not proprietary?
Sure. Our Constitution is publicly available and is published on our website. And I will say it is quite the lengthy document, but a few of the kind of principles that I think play at hand here when we think about these topics is one, that Claude should be honest and truthful. It should sincerely only assert things it believes to be true. It should also have calibrated uncertainty based on evidence and sound reasoning. And it should acknowledge its own uncertainty and lack of knowledge where relevant. And it should approach questions empirically and rely on legitimate epistemic actions like sharing evidence or providing examples. And these are all kind of language that's in the Constitution that speaks to these areas.
Is it conceivable that Claude could inadvertently amplify fringe or views particularly around climate or energy?
This is where our approach to kind of misinformation and disinformation comes in, and it's multifaceted, and I would say it relies on multiple layers of defense. So there's that training level that we spoke about, where we prioritize these behaviors and go through kind of significant training and learning steps to reinforce these policies. But we also then undergo extensive testing before we deploy any of our models to test how it performs against those principles and against our policies. In our system cards, that includes both results on even-handedness and how neutral the model is, and there are also honesty evaluations on whether Claude is accurately answering questions or appropriately stating that it doesn't know the answer. But as kind of malicious use or misuse is possible. And so when our models are deployed, we rely on a number of techniques to detect that sort of usage or that behavior that might violate our usage policy. What we use are a number of kind of smaller models or detection tools that are called classifiers. And what these do is these are trained to screen models and inputs and outputs for potential violations of our policy. And that can then take actions such as blocking the response in a severe case or surfacing accounts for review by our enforcement team. So that's kind of that additional layer.
No, that's good. It sounds like there's an internal safeguard there. So if you had a determined bad actor, would they be able to skew the model by just bombarding it with misleading or false information and content?
Yeah, this is where we aim to have those many layers, and we think those multiple layers are important to stop behavior like that. Yeah. So along with the training, along with the classifiers that detect that policy violating activity, we also maintain a threat intelligence team, and they're following up on external leads or other indications of abuse. So we work with a number of kind of external monitoring solutions and monitor outside networks to see, where content might be spreading or what kind of influence operations content is out there, and check to see if any of this can be traced back to Claude generation. And if so, obviously, we will put a stop to that and take down those accounts. But that is kind of an additional layer of defense beyond what we already do. So, no AI model is kind of perfect or deterministic on every response it makes, but this is why we have these multiple layers.
Okay. As you know, Australia is on the front line of climate change. Even as we speak, there are parts of Queensland that are underwater right now. If we're not underwater, we're burning somewhere. And this is the reality. This is the lived reality for thousands, if not millions, of Australians every single year. And we have heard testimony that around major events, there is a surge of false or misleading content on social media in particular. But given our vulnerabilities in this space, what kind of safeguards would Anthropic put in place, particularly around natural disasters in Australia, to prevent the surge of false and misleading advertising content that could mislead both Australians in the heart of those communities that are affected, as well as first responders? And we do have evidence that this is happening in Australia.
Yes, thank you for that question, Senator. I think many of the guardrails that we put in place around training around those classifiers are designed to kind of be evergreen and work, across all harms that we might encounter and all misinformation harms. But we do pay close attention to current events and to news, which would include, some of the natural disasters or kind of other events that you are mentioning. And we do investigate, including through our threat intelligence team, the types of misinformation campaigns or what types of storylines are out there. And we are able to trace that back to potential usage on Claude to see if Claude has been implicated in generating that content. So we do focus on events, and that does drive a lot of our investigation priorities based on what we're seeing in terms of current events.
I just want to go to the role of civic society, particularly researchers. And I noticed from your Transparency Hub document that you do a lot of work with third parties on policing extremist content, working on that, you work with this US entity, which I wanted to draw you out on as well, the NAIRR, National AI Research Resource. Sounds like it's some sort of new public-private partnership. We have a deep interest in Australia in empowering our civic society, particularly our researchers, whether they be in academic institutions or not-for-profit. They have yielded a treasure trove of information to this committee during this hearing. And I just wanted you to just talk us through what your work is like in the US or globally with third-party researchers and what you're considering here in Australia.
Yeah, thank you for that, Senator.
Because, just to be clear, Evan, it's not that I don't believe what you're telling me regarding your safeguards, and you've given very comprehensive responses, but we need external parties to mark your homework.
Yes, and certainly understand where you're coming from there. Working with third parties is key to our approach on safeguards and kind of widely at Anthropic. So I'll speak to kind of both of those elements. So from a safeguards perspective, we partner with various groups who do stress test our models for us and provide feedback. That has ranged from groups like the Institute for Strategic Dialogue that has helped us actually research the topic of election-related misinformation and influence our model behavior there. And we've also worked with groups like Throughline in New Zealand and the International Association for Suicide Prevention on topics around mental health and caring for our users. And we've actually partnered with many of those organizations to also help provide external up-to-date resources in critical situations when we detect conversations like these. So that's partly the safeguards approach. on the overall Anthropic approach, including when it comes to testing model capabilities and risks. We also work with a number of third-party organizations on that testing. You mentioned kind of U.S. bodies, and we worked with kind of the U.S. AI Safety Institute as well as the U.K.'s AI Safety Institute on assessing our models before release. And we certainly welcome the opportunity to have those conversations with civil society and with the government in Australia.
My final question, Chair, with indulgence, is, I think in Australia, it is incredibly important that our civic groups and our researchers are oxygenated in this environment, right? We don't want to see them pushed to the fringes by big tech companies coming in. And I think they have a really, really important role in civic oversight of tech platforms. And I'd really ask the company to consider engaging in funding some of our civic groups in Australia for, periods of 3 years or more. I think that it would be seen as an act of good faith, and it would help also maintain your social license in this country. And that's just something I'd like your company to consider.
Yes, I appreciate that, and it's absolutely something that we'll take under advisement and consider, because we understand the importance of working with civil society. That's a core part of my role, because we know we can't take on these problems alone, and we want our work to be informed by the context of experts and also local expertise as well. So certainly appreciate that.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just ask a few quick questions, Evan, and then I'll rotate the call. As you may be aware, we've had many of the key tech platforms provide evidence, and one thing I've asked every one of them consistently is, does their company have a position statement or a policy on climate change, either reflecting the science and the consensus or your own kind of ESG sustainability guidelines? And the reason I ask that question very quickly is I think it goes to your credibility with dealing with climate misinformation and taking it seriously.
Yes, yeah, thanks for that, Senator. I would say that I am not aware, or I do not work specifically on what our overall policy statements are as a company. But when it comes to climate responses in the model, Claude should acknowledge where the scientific literature points and where scientific consensus exists. And when there are questions that are around policy and politics, it should engage with the perspectives there. But I can't speak to any kind of official statement from Anthropic itself on the issue.
Yeah, if you could take that on notice, if you do have a position statement or a policy,
yes,
I'd appreciate it. I understand it's a tough environment for you in the US at the moment with President Trump being an open climate denier on the world stage. So, but if you do have a position, I'd be interested. I read, in line with this, I read that Anthropic was lobbying the US administration for a national fossil fuel target to help power its centres. Are you able to tell us if that is correct, or if you have for example, a renewable energy target that you've been lobbying for, but mostly for your data centres?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't speak to that topic. I'm not aware of what we've lobbied for, or what commitments might exist in that area, as it's somewhat outside of the scope of my role.
Great, no worries. Once again, if you could take that on notice, that would be appreciated. So you mentioned the scientific consensus a bit earlier. I think one thing that's different about information integrity around climate change, and this was recently raised at the COP in Brazil, the COP of Truth. You may note that disinformation and climate impacts has been labelled many years in a row by the World Economic Forum as the biggest risk facing humanity. I was just interested how your model, especially with search engines, would incorporate scientific consensus. With decades and decades of tens of thousands of scientists with hundreds of thousands of research papers. How do you incorporate that when, for example, people are doing searches?
Yes, The first note I'd make is kind of Claude's ability to search the web is, only one component of its like overall functionality. For the most part, people are asking Claude information and then receiving a response. And in doing that, Claude is trained to draw on everything that it has been trained on. So when you speak to that decades of scientific research, and all of that information that exists, it should be drawing on that information in its response and acknowledging that history when somebody is asking questions on this topic. Of course, and if somebody is bringing new evidence or asking questions, what it should do is it should think about that empirically. It should consider the balance of evidence that exists on one topic versus the new information that has been presented. And it shouldn't be swayed by just one new piece of information, given how much it's been grounded in that literature from its training.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of quick ones. We had interesting evidence from a scientist here who's one of Australia's key climate or science educators across the board, that he's developing his own AI chatbot to provide information around climate misinformation and disinformation. What kind of guardrails are in place, I suppose, to ensure chatbots powered by Claude are providing factual and accurate information, and what's needed to ensure that into the future? It's obviously it could be for good, and it could undermine climate integrity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is where our kind of multi-layer approach comes into play, where we are training Claude kind of from the outset to avoid misinformation, address questions factually, being honest about its limitations or lack of knowledge, while being able to engage in political discussion where warranted. And so I think it's that training layer that first tries to stop this content from even being generated in the first place. But that's where we come in on the safeguards team of then having this additional layer of defense. So we put in our additional screening models, those classifiers, we put those in place to also block or otherwise flag activity that may violate our usage policy. And that could be disinformation or misinformation that's being created to deceive or mislead others. And so for us, it really goes beyond just the model training. Somebody needs to then be monitoring what that model activity is or what is happening. And that's where the safeguards, that's where our safeguards functionality comes in.
Just on that model, I think the Deputy Chair's got a couple of follow-up questions, and then...
Has Anthropic detected any coordinated attempts to use Claude to generate either large volumes of misleading information? And if you have, where have these hotspots been identified?
Sure, that's a great...
Feel free to venture beyond climate. I mean, I think, we are focused on climate and energy, but obviously this relates to a whole range of other harms.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Senator, because we think it's important to be transparent about the risks that exist. I think there are two main areas where we believe misinformation it poses a particular risk for AI. The first is around models perpetuating that misinformation or falsehoods, which we aim to mitigate with our Constitution and our training process. And the second, as we've been discussing, is around individuals or groups using AI to spread this information or automate tasks and influence operations, which we detect through those guardrails and that ongoing monitoring. So given Claude's capabilities, the greater concern that we have is less around, say, the generation of the content itself, but the power of agentic tools and coding tools to automate that. So, for example, in one of a threat intelligence report that we published in March 2025, we did detect the use of Claude by actors to run what we called an influence as a service operation. And in that campaign, Claude was used in violation of our policies to basically orchestrate the operation of multiple social media accounts. And so this was less even about the generation of the content itself, but a really novel attack where our systems, or Claude was misused to dictate posting schedules, to dictate who these accounts should interact with. And that sort of activity is a concern. And is a focus for our team. And when we detected that, we shut that campaign down, and it influenced our monitoring capabilities going forward to detect that activity earlier. But that is the kind of form of activity that we have seen is in beyond just misinformation, but in the world of fraud and scams, where Claude is used as an orchestrator to help automate some of these activities.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And were there any regional hotspots in the world where you identified the sort of coordinated inauthentic behaviour?
I can't speak to this in exact detail, but I do know for this campaign in particular, it was pretty wide ranging. It actually appeared to be a service that maybe multiple politically motivated actors from across the world were using, because we saw very disparate activity of, influence in a, European political campaign, discussions, around the Middle East. And so, I don't think, at least for this campaign, can say there was any particular hotspot that was identified, but we did see that activity be wide-ranging.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just, last question for me. If I give you an example, Evan, it's not a theoretical. It was provided to us yesterday. The ABC here in Australia did an article on hundreds of deepfake political posts around a politician here called Pauline Hanson from One Nation Party. I understand that they were generated in Vietnam. This is what was reported. And of course, they've been flooding social media here. Not just kind of deep fake, but obviously a lot of fake content. Could you just talk us through how that could be allowed to happen? Obviously, your guardrails are at the point of creation, I understand, but is this because perhaps another form of AI was being used, or another company, or where did it fail? How did this kind of thing happen?
Yeah, without speaking to Anthropic in particular, when I think about in general where AI defenses fail, it's either from not having the guardrails to specifically detect that activity, perhaps because they weren't because a model developer or another actor wasn't aware of the concern or not thoughtful about it. But I think another kind of area that we see in AI models can be a susceptibility to jailbreaks, where if you come to a model and pose questions in a particular way, or otherwise feed the model certain types of text, depending on the model, you can get responses that are kind of out of the intended scope. That's something that's why our multiple guardrails exist. But that's kind of agnostic of AI platform is where you might see that type of behavior be possible.
Okay. And can AI be used to assist hackers, in terms of their operations?
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. That is also a topic that we have discussed in some of our published threat intelligence reports, where hackers or other malicious cyber actors have been aided by AI systems, including Claude, in order to kind of perpetuate fraud or scams, develop ransomware, and seek to extort kind of the ransomed parties for that ransom. And I think kind of increasing cyber capabilities of models is one of our key concerns in terms of its ability to assist in that type of activity. We think there's also great strength in AI models to help detect these bad actors, detect where systems may be vulnerable, and use these cyber capabilities in this way. But it's tricky to find that right balance between assisting good actors in these cyber activities while making sure that we prevent the kind of bad activity.
Okay, thank you. Senator Pocock. Yeah.
Chair. Thank you, Mr. Frondorf. We really appreciate your time. President Trump recently called Anthropic left-wing nut jobs, an out-of-control radical left AI company, and a White House statement referred to your woke AI company's terms of service. We've obviously seen a lot of reporting around this, but I was hoping that you could maybe describe what actually led to this happening.
Thank you, Senator, and appreciate you asking this question. That situation with the Department of War is ongoing and quickly evolving. I unfortunately am not equipped to comment on active litigation at this time, and it's outside of the scope of my role in particular.
Sure. I don't expect you to comment on litigation, but I'm just wondering if you could inform us what actually led to that. My understanding is that restrictions were written into contracts with the Department of War around lethal autonomous warfare and the surveillance of Americans en masse. I'm just wondering if that is true.
Yes. So, as mentioned, this is out of the scope of kind of what I work on and my expertise. But as Anthropic, as we've stated, we do support the lawful use of Claude for defense and intelligence purposes, but with two exceptions: the mass domestic surveillance of Americans, because we believe that it is incompatible with democratic values, and the use of fully autonomous weapons, because we believe AI is not reliable enough at the moment to take humans out of the loop. I'm not able to comment beyond that, but that is our core principle when it comes to defense and intelligence.
Thank you. And I understand there is litigation underway, so I understand you can't comment. But after being labelled a supply chain risk by the Trump administration, we've seen reports of legal action. I don't want any details there, but as I understand it, at least two of your competitors, Google and OpenAI, have supported the court action. And I'm just wondering what you think it says about the AI industry when competitors are supporting each other in court.
I think on this question, Senator, I think this is something that I would need to take on notice, given it's kind of outside of my scope of building safeguards to protect the models.
Sure. I appreciate that, and I'm happy for you to take it on notice. When it comes to AI mis and disinformation, do you accept that AI tools present a significant challenge in mis and disinformation being created and spread?
Yeah, thanks for that, Senator. I think yes, we agree that misinformation is one of the risks that is associated with AI, and kind of as discussed before, kind of really arises in two ways. One, it's the potential for AI models to create or perpetuate misinformation, and then secondly, a model's ability or AI's ability to automate certain operations or otherwise coordinate those operations. So I think there's both the risks that are associated with generation, where we have multiple defenses at the training level and the screening level, and then there's also those risks of Claude being used as a tool for automation and misuse in that way, which is another set of defenses that we have in place. But certainly agree that it is a risk.
Thank you. I think Anthropic has been a lot more transparent around threats than, from what I've seen, than some of the other AI companies. And I'm interested what evidence you found that Claude has been used to create misleading content or use bots.
Yes. So on that question, we have published reports that are from our kind of threat intelligence team of cases where we have seen Claude both used in situations that are related to fraud or scams, but also in an influence operations campaign. This wasn't related to climate disinformation or misinformation. But we did find that influence as a service operation, where Claude was used in violation of our policies, kind of orchestrate and direct hundreds of social media accounts and do so with different politically motivated personas. So it is certainly activity that we have found and published about in our threat intelligence reporting.
And what happens when you detect that?
Yeah, when we detect a campaign like that, we seek to shut down that operation. And I think an important part of what we do on the threat intelligence side is, like, since this is activity that we have investigated and shut down, then that needs to feed back into our training and detection systems. So then what do we need to build, or what do we need to enhance around our real-time classifiers or around our training to block that content or block those actions from being generated in the first place. So we see that as a really important feedback loop of course, you detect that type of activity, you shut it down, you work to notify victims or relevant actors as needed, but then that needs to feed back into our ongoing building of defenses to make it less likely for that to happen the next time around.
Okay, thank you.
Can you ask how the social media companies responded? Did they take down as well?
Sure.
Those accounts?
Sure. How many people are dedicated to looking at this issue at Anthropic?
Sure. So our safeguards team, it includes a number of groups. It's policy, enforcement, threat intelligence, trust and safety operations teams, and we also work quite closely with our research and engineering teams who build the underlying models and technical safeguards. So I'd hesitate to give a single headcount number just because that work spans multiple teams and it's really embedded into the product and building of the product at Anthropic.
Sure, but you don't have a team specifically looking at mis and disinformation and the use of bots?
It is one of the multiple kind of harm areas that fall under the scope of our safeguards team. Our safeguards team manages and develops the usage policy for how Claude can and can't be used, and that includes a variety of topic areas, sure. Including mis and disinformation.
How big is your safeguards team?
Yeah, I think that's where, just given the work with multiple teams, where I'd hesitate to give a single headcount number. But okay. I'm certainly happy to take on notice a more detailed breakdown if that would be useful. For
Thank you. That would be very useful if you can take that on notice. And then just on the this area, and it sort of relates to some of the questions that other members of the committee have asked. You've obviously said that you look for the use of Claude to generate mis and disinformation, potentially direct bots to spread it. You look to shut that down. But I imagine once that's happened, a lot of those posts or information is out there on social media. What are you doing with social media companies to then flag that, get them to also remove that content, and what has the response been from the likes of Meta and X?
Yes, thank you for asking that. So we do work with a number of kind of external monitoring vendors to track misuse across platforms. We're also a founding member of the Frontier Model Forum to facilitate information sharing on these topics and others, and that includes some of the platforms where this content might be spread. I am not party or familiar to conversations that we've had specifically, with social media platforms and how they've actioned this in particular, but we do seek to work with them and share information. Okay,
maybe if you could take that on notice, what the sort of workflow is. Last question. Yeah, what the workflow is and how that actually happens, and if not, social media companies have actually taken down those posts. Just finally, this is sort of I think, stretching the terms of reference, but given we've got the opportunity with you, I really wanted to ask it. People I represent here in the Australian Capital Territory, and I know Australians around the country, are concerned about the climate and environmental impacts of data centres. We're told here in Australia that data centre demand in Sydney alone is forecast to be roughly the equivalent of our national capital, Canberra's total drinking water. And it was reported today in the Australian Financial Review that Anthropic is looking to expand construction of data centres. What is Anthropic doing to ensure that there isn't a spike in emissions, water consumption, and potentially electricity prices?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for bringing up this important topic, Senator. This topic is outside of the scope of what I do day to day, but I can address it briefly. So in the United States, where our data center build out is currently underway, we've made public commitments to cover the full cost of grid upgrades needed to connect our facilities, bring net new power generation online to match our demand. We've invested in curtailment systems that reduce the draw of power at peak times. And we also seek to deploy water efficient cooling. And we expect to take that similar approach in any market where we build infrastructure.
So just to confirm, you'll voluntarily take that approach, or do you need guardrails sort of put in place, guidelines by the government?
I'm not the right person to speak to specific regulation, but we'd expect to take that same approach that we've taken in the US to any market.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Look, just before I go to Senator Roberts, just a follow-up question from Senator Pocock's questions. Like a platform like Meta, Evan, it requires you to indicate if you're using AI when creating a post or doing a post, but I think it might be voluntary. But are the tools sophisticated enough for platforms or even third-party fact checkers, for example, being able to detect the use of AI? And do you assist any of these groups with the detection of deepfakes and other misuses of AI?
Yes, thanks for that, Senator. I think one important note to call out is that Claude is a text-based model today, so it does not generate images or video. That certainly mitigates some of the risk associated with kind of deepfake or synthetic content that's available. So when it does come to text-based content, we do. As part of our usage policy, if someone is operating a chatbot that is interfacing with consumers, that they must disclose that AI is being used. And similarly, if content is being created for a media or a journalistic approach, we do require a human in the loop to be in that process to evaluate that content before it is posted. So our policies wouldn't allow kind of automated posting to social media platforms.
Great, excellent. Thank you. Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for appearing, Mr. Frondorf. Now, you're from an AI company, so I'm going to step back a bit and ask some broad questions because there's a lot of ignorance about AI. What is AI? And could you include in your definition the breadth of scope that many AI providers provide?
Sure. So an AI model like Claude is a large language model. And what Claude does is it is trained on a very large body of text from across the internet and published literature. It learns from that very large body of information sources, that internet data, licensed data from third parties, data that we generate internally. And what it does is it is able to develop a broad understanding of language and knowledge. We then apply additional steps in a second stage to shape the model's behavior around how it responds to questions, what tone it takes, how it handles sensitive topics. But at the end of the day, when you provide an input to a large language model like Claude, you're getting a predictive function, predicting the next response or the next token or word, as we call it, based on all of that training data that it has seen before. So it is taking the input and in a sophisticated way, predicting what the next word or response would be based on that input.
Thank you. So it's based upon hoovering up a lot of data, collecting a lot of data, aggregating it, and also it can be shaped by algorithms or directions or instructions within the AI developer, correct?
Yes, AI models are trained on large amounts of data from diverse information sources, and that kind of gives it its general foundation of language and knowledge and how that works. And then there is a kind of second stage, a training stage to shape that behavior and provide principles to the model. The main way we do that is through our public constitution that lays out those principles that we've developed to guide Claude's behavior.
Thank you. Now, there are many different AIs. I don't expect you to name your competitors. Can you give us an understanding of the industry and the different types of models and different types of restrictions and opportunities for each of them? Without naming them, just the range, not each of them, I'm sorry, just the range, the scope of AI.
Sure. So I think what I can best do is speak to the kind of scope of large language models. I think artificial intelligence has been used in kind of many capacities and includes areas like machine learning or other places where artificial intelligence is being used in a predictive way. But for the large language models that we're familiar with, there are a kind of a set of kind of general purpose or models that are available. I won't speak to all of the names, but these are like Anthropic's Claude model in that it can be used for a variety of purposes and really can provide answers on any topic. Then many product makers or companies may seek to integrate those AI models or develop with those AI models in a way that is more specific to their use case. So they may take a model like Claude to build a chatbot for their users to interact with for customer service, or they may use the model in a way to drive scientific research or to help with analysis of documents. So you kind of start at those foundation models that exist, and then there's a variety of kind of work streams or a variety of ways that developers and product makers and companies kind of use those AI models to create their own AI products.
Thank you. That's comprehensive. So what we've got with AI is something that learns from the internet or from selected parts of the internet. So if there's a lot of crap in the internet, it learns crap. Then you've got instructions, and then you've got within each AI manufacturer, and then you've got tailoring for specific purposes. Is that correct? Good summary?
I would say that all AI models are trained on a large amount of data and then go through a learning process to determine how to respond to those questions in a way that is useful to the user.
Thank you. Let's go to something the Chair raised a minute ago, Pauline Hanson's party. It's actually now called One Nation, not Pauline Hanson's One Nation. But we have had phenomenal growth, staggering growth, and we get so many compliments for our work. And yet now and we're inundated with membership, with people wanting to support us and praising us, and I mean that sincerely. But now we've heard that the ABC, which is notorious for propaganda, is now saying that it's due to Vietnamese bots. Is AI often blamed for things that are quite natural and truthful? Do you get the blame for someone doing something?
So, Senator, I'm not familiar with this particular situation, and so can't speak to that. But I would say we take seriously our responsibility to make the benefits of AI and maximize the benefits of AI for the world, and that includes both kind of providing a useful product and useful models while also having various guardrails in place to prevent harm.
Thank you. I don't want to put you in a position of talking about a competitor, but ChatGPT version 4 did what most AI does and goes out and hoovers the internet. ChatGPT, when used in version 4.0, and that's not version 4.0, not 4.0, 4.0, can be used in super rational mode, meaning it goes out and only uses verified data. And the responses under ChatGPT version 4.0 super rational mode are quite astoundingly different from the normal ChatGPT. Do you have anything like super rational mode within Claude?
Yes, Senator, I can't speak to this particular ChatGPT feature, but what I would say is that the way that we train Claude applies to all Claude models, and that foundation comes from our Constitution. And the key principles in that Constitution are to approach all questions empirically. It should be factually accurate. It should be honest about where it's limited on its knowledge, but also where there is a range of perspectives on contested topics, it should be able to put forth the best and strongest viewpoints on those topics to educate our users and promote discussion.
Thank you. What do you mean by factually accurate? Do you mean peer-reviewed scientific papers, legitimate peer-reviewed scientific papers as the basis, verified data? How do you verify the data to make sure it's factually accurate?
Yes. So for our purposes, we are not kind of verifying specific points of fact. So we're not, looking at specific topics and judging kind of what information is in or out. Overall, the process for kind of training a model is first a model kind of critiques and revises its own responses against the principles that we have in the Constitution. And then second, the model is shown kind of different possible responses to the same question. And it uses that to train itself to prefer the one that better aligns with those principles. So it's seeing many thousands and thousands of examples and learns to internalize those principles and how it generates responses. So on an area like this, it is designed to pull from the data it has seen, but it is using judgment on presenting kind of factual information in areas of consensus based on what it's seen in the training data.
Thank you. Last question is probably the most important. Some humans seek to control others through censorship, limiting opportunities, whatever. This has been shown throughout history, correct, Mr. Frondorf? What I want to know is, how do you accommodate such things in your AI, and in particular, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN so-called climate body, every report, and I've read them, I've read all 6, every report of the IPCC, starting from its first in 1990, has been based on a lie. Every report. How do you make sure that people don't refer back to such lies?
Thanks, Senator. I'm not familiar with the specific reports, but our goal is that Claude is designed to reflect scientific evidence and reflect the kind of majority of what it has seen in its data. But Claude is also designed to engage with a wide variety of perspectives on climate and energy policy, and that includes skeptical ones. So, if someone is asking Claude around policy questions around the energy transition or weighing economic costs, it should engage with those full range of perspectives. But we overall draw a distinction between kind of questions, factual questions or empirical questions, where we want Claude to draw from the literature, and those policy questions where we want Claude to be even-handed.
Thank you, Mr. Frondorf. I appreciate the manner in which you've answered these questions.
Thank you, Evan. Just a couple of quick questions, and then we'll wrap up. We're very, very appreciative of your time. In February 26, Time magazine reported that Anthropic had dropped some key pillars of your responsible scaling policy, RSP, including scrapping the promise to not release AI models if Anthropic can't guarantee proper risk mitigations in advance. Can you talk us through that? Like why that was reported and why you did that?
Yeah, thank you. So the responsible scaling policy is not my area of expertise working on safeguards. The RSP is focused on a narrow set of risks, while my focus is on the usage policy, which addresses areas like the misuse and misinformation that we've been speaking about, which doesn't fall under our RSP.
Okay, I'm just interested to give you an example. This committee has received hundreds of submissions from a whole range of stakeholders on this issue, and we have had some submissions that have been looked at in detail and that have used AI, that, for example, some academics have said, well, this is not an appropriate reference of my work, or my work's been misquoted or used out of context. Is that a function of these models not being developed enough, or is it impossible to actually police this issue, or not police this issue, but have guardrails around, for example, individuals writing substantial submissions to a government body and then saying, well, AI is responsible for the mistakes in those submissions?
Yes, thank you for that, Senator. On this question, I would say that we take this risk of AI being used in a way to perpetuate kind of misinformation and disinformation seriously, and so to avoid maybe these instances where kind of an answer isn't factual or maybe is being used out of context, I think first you have all of the training processes that we've discussed today, but this is partially where our usage policy comes in, that prohibits that creation of this misleading content or otherwise deceptive content. And when we're detecting that, like what we're doing is often not looking on a kind of specific topic by topic basis, but instead are finding this by the types of requests that are being made. So, is someone requesting content about a person, but asking for that information to be certain information to be added or embellished? Is someone asking for Claude to automate posting or create social media accounts? We, do put in place detection based on those techniques or actions that the user is taking to try and catch misuse, regardless of the subject matter. But this is one place where it is important to have these multiple layers of defense, of both to ensure accurate and factual responses at the model level, but then to catch cases that are against our usage policy.
Thank you. Look, last question for me, Evan. Like you've said, you mentioned you're moving to Australia. You've set up shop here. I understand you've appointed some key personnel now in Sydney. What guarantees can you give Australians that the use of your product is safe?
Yes, thanks for that, Senator. On that question, I would say that we have, from the safeguards perspective, we have built this multifaceted layers of defense that includes, at the model training, guardrail, enforcement, and monitoring levels. And we take care for that information to be transparent and available to our users. So our Constitution is a publicly available document that details what our intentions are for Claude's values and behavior. When we release our models, they undergo extensive testing, and we publish those results in our system cards that are available. And then we also do seek to be transparent about where we have seen our systems be misused through our threat intelligence reporting. So we do think transparency about AI risk and about AI capabilities is crucial to providing that comfort to users, including those in Australia.
Thank you, Evan. Did you have a last question, Chair? Last question, and then we're finished. Yeah.
Evan, your company, Anthropic, is a company that's domiciled in the US, so obviously you fall under the purview of US law. And my question relates to the Cloud Act. And I'm interested to know, is there any Australian data, user data, that would fall under the remit, theoretically, of the Cloud Act?
Thanks, Senator. I'm not aware of the Cloud Act or kind of the implications here. So this is a question that I would need to take back on notice.
Could you take it on? Yes, if you could take it on notice, that would be useful. And if you could include in your answer if there are any means for Australian user data to be protected from the Cloud Act, that would also be very helpful, if you don't mind. Just on the topic of oversight, I just want to go back to, again, researcher access and civic oversight. What public access does Anthropic provide so that Australian researchers would have oversight over the functioning of your models, which at the moment is Claude, but there may be others in the future? for example, public content libraries, search libraries, whatever libraries?
Yes, absolutely. We're supportive of external research on AI risks and AI usage. We engage constructively with researchers that study AI safety and misuse, and work with a number of third parties to stress test and evaluate our models. We've also published extensively ourselves on how Claude is being used and other privacy-preserving analyses on how people use Claude and its impact on society. And so we're always happy to have discussions on further researcher access that balances user privacy concerns with those legitimate aims.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Evan, and once again, thanks for appearing at short notice. It's a brave new world, but sometimes it does feel like a grave new world. So we appreciate the evidence you've given today.
Thank you.
So that concludes today's hearing. Thank you to all witnesses who appeared and to Hansard and Broadcasting for their assistance. The committee has agreed that responses to questions or notice should be provided by the 17th of March 2026, and the committee now stands adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.